I was driving from Austin back to Waco, on the familiar road I'd traveled countless times before. But today, everything suddenly felt different. The Texas sky was overcast and heavy, as if it were concealing an impending storm. I had the feeling that I wasn't just going to visit my parents. I was heading straight toward something inevitable. My name is Matthew Brooks, 30 years old, a cybersecurity specialist, a job that requires calmness, analysis, and risk management. Normally, I'm used to keeping a cool head in the worst situations. But right now, my heart was pounding chaotically, like a system that had just encountered a critical error. I opened my phone and reread the message my father had sent that morning. Matthew, we need to talk urgently. Come straight to the house this afternoon. There's a very important matter that you need to handle. It was a commanding message from my father without a single word of greeting or any sign of concern. Just short, cold, and carrying the tone of an order. I understood immediately. This trip would not be like the previous ones. When I pushed open the door and stepped into the old house in Waco, the familiar smell of coffee hit me, but the atmosphere was oppressively silent. There were no sounds of laughter, no voice of my mother calling from the kitchen, just a heavy quiet like a ticking time bomb. My father, Edward Brooks, sat upright on the sofa, his face stern with deep wrinkles, looking more like a general about to issue orders than a father welcoming his son. He was wearing his old checkered shirt, but his eyes were sharp, devoid of any warmth. Beside him was my mother, Joanne Brooks, sitting silently, her hands tightly clutching a handkerchief, her eyes red but holding back tears. And my younger brother, Lucas, was sitting in the corner of the room, constantly shifting positions, twisting his legs one moment, tapping his fingers on the table the next, like a child caught doing something wrong. The anxiety and worry were clearly visible on his face, making me wonder, what the hell is going on? I forced a smile and walked into the living room, trying to break the silence. Mom, Dad, I'm home. What's the matter that you called me so urgently? My voice trembled slightly, but I tried to stay calm. My intuition told me this meeting wasn't an ordinary visit. The tension in the air was like a string about to snap, making my chest tighten. I sat down on the chair opposite them, my eyes scanning the room. The family photos hanging on the walls, the childhood memories. But today they only made me more uneasy. My father cleared his throat and got straight to the point without any preamble, like an unexpected punch. Matthew, we need to talk. Your brother Lucas is in trouble. He borrowed $250,000 to buy a house, but now he can't pay it back. You have to cover that amount. His words came out dryly without any explanation, as if it were an obvious command. I was stunned and asked again, my heart pounding. Lucas borrowed $250,000? How come I've never heard about this? I looked at my mother, then at Lucas. Lucas lowered his head, avoiding my gaze. In that moment, I realized I was the only one who hadn't been informed in advance. Why did you borrow so much? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. And why am I the one who has to pay it? My mother spoke up first, her voice low. Because you're the eldest son. When the family is in trouble, you have to step up. I clenched my fists. That was the entire amount I had saved over the years, for my upcoming wedding with Sophie and for our first child growing in her belly. We had planned everything carefully, step by step. I can't pay that for Lucas, I said. That's the money for my future, for Sophie and the baby she's carrying. As soon as I finished speaking, my father slammed his hand on the table. So you're choosing your wife and child over this family? You're truly irresponsible, daring to turn your back on your own flesh and blood. I looked up and met his eyes directly. I'm not turning my back on the family. I'm just choosing to fulfill my responsibility as a husband and a father. If I abandoned that, then I would truly be the irresponsible one. My mother frowned, her voice trembling but resolute. Lucas needs to stabilize his life. You can't just abandon your brother like that. I replied calmly. I'm not abandoning Lucas, but I can't sacrifice the future of my own small family to bear the consequences of his decision. At that point, Lucas finally spoke, his voice small and urgent. Bro, I'm really in a dead end. If you don't help, I don't know what to do anymore. I looked at him, not angry, just exhausted. You borrowed the money, you bought the house. I can't take my child's future to cover that for you." The atmosphere in the room sank. I took a deep breath and then spoke slowly and clearly. "I'm sorry, but I won't pay this amount." My father stood up abruptly, pointing straight at me. "If you don't pay, then from now on this family will consider you gone." My mother nodded, saying nothing more. The room fell dead silent. And I understood in that moment that everything had been decided, and it didn't take me long to consider. "I'm sorry, but I can't cover such a large amount." The refusal came out firmly, but inside I was in turmoil. I loved my family, but this time I had to think about myself. The tension escalated immediately. My father slammed the table with a bang, his face red with anger. "You're selfish, irresponsible. You only think about yourself, not caring about the family. I raised you all these years just for you to turn your back on me now?" His voice roared, echoing throughout the room, startling me. He stood up, pointing his finger in my face, his eyes blazing. I had never seen my father this angry, as if I were an enemy rather than his son. My mother chimed in, her voice trembling but determined. "Matthew, you've disappointed us so much." She looked at me with pleading eyes, but behind them was the familiar pressure. I felt suffocated, surrounded from all sides. Lucas begged, his voice weak, trying to sound pitiful. "Bro, I'm begging you. I don't know what else to do. You're my only hope now." He looked at me, his eyes glistening with tears, but I knew it was an act. He had always been spoiled, always avoiding responsibility. The atmosphere in the living room became suffocating, oppressive like a nightmare. My heart was pounding, sweat beading on my palms. I stood firm under the pressure, not arguing harshly, but also not backing down. "I understand, but I have my own family. Sophie is pregnant. We need that money." My voice was calm and resolute, even though emotions were churning inside me. My father pointed straight at my face. "If that's your choice, then get the hell out of this house. I don't want to see your face again," he roared, his face contorted with rage. I stood up and left the house with a heavy heart. As I stepped outside, the Texas wind blew coldly, carrying the feeling that I had lost not just a conversation, but my place in the family. The car sped along the highway, but my mind was in turmoil, anxious about what lay ahead. Back in Austin, I threw myself into work as a way to escape. As a cybersecurity specialist, I spent hours in front of the screen, hunting for vulnerabilities and protecting systems from invisible intruders. But now, my own family had become the biggest vulnerability in my heart. In the first days after the confrontation, I still hoped everything would return to peace as before. I texted and called. "Dad, I still want to talk. Can we find another way? Mom, I'm really worried about everyone. I'm not running away. I just hope we can talk again." The calls rang and then went silent. Messages were sent but never replied to. I called again and again, but the other end remained quiet, as if no one had ever been there. I didn't beg, nor did I blame. I just tried to hold on to a fragile thread, hoping there was still room between us for a decent conversation. But day after day, that silence grew thicker, colder, and absolute, like an invisible wall blocking everything. Every time I picked up the phone, my chest tightened. Not out of anger, but from gradually realizing that they had actively chosen to stop listening to me. That prolonged silence felt like an endless nightmare, forcing me to face a harsh truth. Any effort to mend things from only one side becomes meaningless. I couldn't keep chasing a door that had been firmly shut. In the end, I chose to stop, turning my focus back to my future family. It wasn't an easy decision, it caused me pain. But I knew that if I kept holding on, I would be the one to exhaust myself first. Sophie and I began finalizing the last preparations for our wedding. The date had been set long ago, even before that confrontation, and we opted for a simple, cozy ceremony that fit our budget. No extravagant party, no hundreds of guests, just close friends, nearby colleagues, and family from both sides. Sophie and I chose the flowers, the cake, and the venue together. A small garden on the outskirts of Austin with lush green trees and a sparkling pond under the sunlight. "What do you think of everything?" Sophie asked, holding a simple wedding dress sample. I smiled and hugged her. Perfect. Just like us. But deep down, I was still anxious. I had sent invitations to my parents and Lucas a month earlier with a note. I hope everyone can come. This is the most important day of my life. Would they show up? That question haunted me every night. The wedding day arrived with the Texas sky bright and golden, but my heart felt heavy like dark clouds. The garden was decorated simply, dangling lanterns, tables with fresh flowers and homemade cake. Friends laughed and chatted lively, colleagues offered congratulations, and Sophie's family, her parents, siblings, hugged me warmly. "Welcome to the family," Sophie's father patted my shoulder, his eyes sparkling. The atmosphere was joyful and sincere, without ostentation, just as we had wanted. Sophie emerged in her simple white dress, hair flowing loosely, her radiant smile melting my heart. We exchanged vows under an ancient oak tree, promising to stand by each other through all hardships. I don't promise you a perfect life, but I promise to stay, even when things are hardest, and to always choose you every day, I whispered as I slipped the ring onto her finger. Everyone applauded, laughter echoing. But throughout the ceremony, I unconsciously kept glancing toward the entrance gate. Every time a car pulled up, my heart skipped a beat, an uncontrollable reflex. I wondered, almost subconsciously, would my family come? I tried to keep a smile on my face, but images kept flashing in my mind. My father walking in with his usual stern expression but softened eyes. My mother hugging me tightly with tears. Lucas patting my shoulder in congratulations as if no rift had ever happened. I had imagined that moment more than once. But the gate remained empty. No familiar footsteps. No belated congratulations. Just a prolonged silence, quietly confirming that today, on my most important day, they had chosen not to appear. As the reception wound down, the soft music faded and guests began to leave, I realized not a single person from my blood family had shown up. A wave of sorrow surged, sweeping away the joy. I felt embarrassed under the concerned glances of others, friends whispering, colleagues avoiding questions. "Where are your parents?" a close friend asked quietly. I forced a smile. My parents had some personal matters, so they couldn't make it. Things happened a bit suddenly and they couldn't arrange it in time. Sophie's parents showed wonderful understanding and tact. They didn't probe or bring up anything that would make me uncomfortable. Sophie's father just patted my shoulder. "Today is your day." Her mother hugged me. "We are family now." Sophie stayed by my side, silently comforting me. She squeezed my hand under the table, whispering, "You're okay. I'm here now." She quietly shielded me from that pain, not letting me face it alone on what should have been a day of complete joy. But that night, when we returned to our small apartment in Austin and all sounds quieted down, I lay beside Sophie and tears just fell without needing a reason. She turned to me, not asking much, just gently wiping the tears from my cheeks. "I know you're sad," she said softly. "Sad because you hoped and that hope wasn't returned." I remained silent. Sophie took my hand and held it tightly. "But you didn't do anything wrong," she continued, her voice calm yet firm. "You did everything a son could do. Some voids aren't created by us and we can't always fill them." She pressed her forehead against mine. "We don't have a perfect family, but we have each other. And from here we'll build a home where no one ever feels abandoned." I nodded slightly, wrapping my arms around her. The pain was still there, but for the first time I no longer felt like I was facing it alone. 6 months later, Sophie gave birth to our son, Caleb Brooks. It was an autumn morning, the hospital in Austin bustling. Sophie was in pain. I held her hand throughout the delivery, my heart pounding as if it might burst. "I believe in you," I encouraged her. And then Caleb's cry rang out, a handsome boy with jet black hair and eyes just like mine. I held him in my arms, the feeling of fatherhood overwhelming, happiness mixed with worry. But at the hospital, only Sophie's family was present, her parents beaming, her siblings bringing flowers and gifts. They hugged Caleb and congratulated us. "The grandson looks just like his dad," Sophie's mother said. And my parents, completely absent. I had texted them beforehand. "Sophie is about to give birth, I hope you can come." But no reply. The moment I became a father, which should have been complete, now felt lacking. I glanced at the door, hoping in vain, my chest tightening. On Caleb's 1-month celebration, we held a small gathering at home. Cake, balloons, friends stopping by. The house was warm with baby laughter, Sophie holding our son and smiling radiantly. But that void became even more apparent. The faces I once thought would never leave, my father with his stern smile, my mother with her warm hugs, Lucas with his playful jokes, were now missing. I stood in the corner of the room watching Caleb sleep peacefully, my heart aching sharply. In all those important milestones, the wedding, the birth, the 1-month celebration, the only ones by my side were Sophie and her parents. They quietly filled the love I had lost. Sophie's father taught me how to hold the baby. Her mother cooked nutritious meals, and Sophie was always there, sharing every burden. I gradually realized that Sophie was an even better and more forgiving wife than I had imagined. She didn't complain, nor did she let my pain become a burden for her. Because of that, I didn't want my wounds to drag her into suffering alongside me, so I chose silence and handled my emotions on my own. I no longer mentioned my family. I didn't talk about my parents or Lucas, but deep down I knew I hadn't truly let go. The old hurts quietly settled, becoming part of memories I wasn't ready to touch. Every night when Caleb cried for milk, I would get up, carry him around the house, and memories would flood back. I remembered my childhood days in Waco, my father teaching me to fix cars, my mother telling bedtime stories. Now, it all felt like a distant dream. I focused on caring for my wife and son, going to work on time, coming home to help Sophie, playing with Caleb. Life gradually stabilized, but the anxiety still lingered. Would they ever come back one day? Or would this void last forever? My daily life flowed in a steady rhythm, like a clock that never missed a beat. Every morning I woke up at 6 a.m., brewed strong black coffee, checked work emails, then kissed Sophie and Caleb goodbye. I drove to the office in downtown Austin, where I sat in front of the computer screen, hunting for cybersecurity vulnerabilities and protecting data for major companies. The job demanded intense focus, and I used it as a shield to forget my worries. During lunch breaks, I video called Sophie to ask about Caleb. The little boy was babbling as he learned to speak, grinning widely when he saw his dad's face. In the evenings, I stopped by the supermarket to buy vegetables and fresh milk, then rushed into the kitchen to help my wife prepare dinner. At night, we played with our son together, reading children's books, stacking wooden blocks, or simply cuddling him on the sofa while watching cartoons. I tried to keep everything stable and peaceful for this small family, like a silent promise to myself. No arguments, no drama, just calm, ordinary days where I could control everything. But deep down, I knew it was only the outer shell. Inside, the cracks still smoldered. But when night fell and the house sank into quiet, everything changed. Streetlights filtered through the window, the Texas wind whistled softly outside the porch, and I lay awake in bed beside Sophie, who was sleeping soundly. Old memories suddenly flooded back, like an unexpected torrent sweeping away the calm I had tried to build during the day. I always acted strong in front of my wife and son, laughing, hugging as if nothing had happened. But in the dead of night, when I was alone with my thoughts, tears rolled down my cheeks, soaking the pillow. I couldn't hold them back. Those tears were like a release for all the pent-up resentment. Anxiety, worry. Would these memories ever stop haunting me? Or would they continue night after night, draining me completely? I recalled my childhood, those days in the old house in Waco where it all began. From a very early age, I was accustomed to being the one who sacrificed the most in the family. My parents taught me that the eldest son had to yield and take the harder share. "Matthew, you're the older brother. You have to set an example for your younger sibling," my father often said, his voice stern like a command. The heavy household chores were almost always assigned to me by default. chopping firewood for winter, cleaning the garage, even mowing the backyard lawn under the scorching Texas sun. All of it fell to me. And Lucas? He was favored, rarely required to shoulder similar responsibilities. Lucas is still young. Let his older brother do it, my mother would often excuse, her eyes always softer when looking at my younger brother. Back then, I didn't resent it because I thought it was normal. But now, thinking back, my chest tightens. How could they be so biased? Each memory felt like a knife cut, making me anxiously wait to see if the pain would surge even more. In my teenage years, it became even clearer. At 16, I started working part-time at a fast food restaurant near home to cover my own school and living expenses. Every afternoon after school, I rushed to work, wiping tables, frying potatoes, manning the counter until late. The smell of grease clung to my clothes, my arms and legs ached, but I gritted my teeth and endured. I can take care of myself, I told my parents, trying to sound proud. And Lucas? He always received full support, tuition, books, even a new bicycle, without having to lift a finger. Lucas has talent, so he should focus on studying, my father reasoned. And me? I was a good student too, but why did I have to fend for myself? On those late nights coming home, exhausted and sore, I lay staring at the ceiling and silently wondered, why am I in this situation? But then I stopped asking, and I didn't complain. I grew up believing that hard work and endurance were obvious duties, while recognition wasn't necessary. My parents rarely praised me. Whenever I brought money home to contribute, my father just nodded and said a brief, "Good." Nothing more, nothing less. And back then, I told myself that was enough, that fulfilling my duty was reward in itself. Only now, looking back to those memories, leave a bitter taste in me that's hard to name. I suddenly realized I had grown accustomed to living in expectation without daring to ask, accustomed to giving without knowing if there would ever be a day when I was truly seen, not for what I provided, but for who I am. When I reached adulthood, I left home early to make my own living. At 18, I moved to Austin, attending college while working part-time to cover costs. I didn't live lavishly, but it was enough that I didn't have to ask my parents for money, and enough to start shouldering more for the family. Not only did I support myself, but I also regularly sent financial help back to the house in Waco. Every month I sent a few $100s, sometimes for roof repairs, sometimes for utility bills or unexpected expenses. To my parents, it was necessary help. To me, it gradually became a default responsibility. Most of that money ended up revolving around Lucas. Back then, my brother was still in school with ever-increasing expenses, tuition, living costs, things my parents thought I could cover for him. For years, I never refused any request, even when I had to tighten my own belt or skip a rare vacation to take extra shifts. "Bro, I'm short on cash," Lucas would call, and I'd transfer it immediately, even if my own wallet was nearly empty. That endurance lasted so long it became part of who I was, like a hard habit to break. In return, I was always the one in the background, the one who had to be understanding, who had to yield. "Matthew is sensible," they would say. But the further along it went, the more I felt like I was just a shadow, quietly waiting for the moment I would be acknowledged. Not for what I brought, but for who I am. Thinking about the present, I can't help feeling bitter. All those sacrifices seemed to mean nothing in the face of the one single time I said no. Just one decision to protect my own future and my small family. Refusing to pay the $250,000 debt for Lucas caused them to turn their backs completely, as if all my previous efforts had never existed. I remember the night after the wedding, lying awake, thinking about all the times I sent money home. They used my money to favor Lucas, and now they abandoned me because I refused once. My heart pounded, anxious, as if waiting for an emotional storm to hit. From those piled up memories, I realized that the love in my family had never been unconditional. It always came with silent demands and favoritism toward someone else, toward Lucas. I decided to set all the hurt aside and learn to stand on my own, no longer expecting recognition or approval from my old family. I focused on protecting the life and the small family I have now. Sophie with her gentle smile, Caleb with his babbling laughter. Every morning I watch my son sleep and tell myself, I won't let him have to sacrifice like I did. But in the dead of night, the memories still return, making me anxious and worried. Will I ever truly be able to let go? 2 years passed quickly like a fleeting breeze, but for me it felt like an endlessly long journey to rebuild myself. I threw myself into work in Austin, advancing from a cybersecurity specialist to a small team manager. The long days in front of the screen, hunting system vulnerabilities and dealing with invisible threats. All of it helped me forget the pain to some extent. At home, I nurtured our little life, fixing things around the house, teaching Caleb to ride his first bicycle, cooking simple but cozy dinners with Sophie. She was always there, her steady comfort and companionship like a lighthouse in the darkness. You've tried so hard already. Not everyone sees it, but I do. Sophie would often whisper when I was tired, her hand gently stroking my back. We took weekend walks in the park with Caleb running ahead, his laughter echoing and warming my heart. On the surface, everything gradually stabilized. Our small apartment had truly become a home, with family photos hanging on the walls and toys scattered on the floor. But deep down, I still carried an indescribable sense of lack, a void that had never been filled. Even though I no longer mentioned my old family, no longer talked about my parents or Lucas, it was still there, like an old scar that occasionally throbbed. Every time I watched Caleb play, I wondered, what would I have been like without my parents? That anxiety crept in stealthily, making me worry that one day the void would swallow me whole. One ordinary day like any other, I was at the office, focused on a security report when my phone vibrated. The screen displayed my father's name, Edward Brooks. In that moment, my heart felt like it stopped beating. I froze, my hand holding the phone trembling, old emotions immediately surging like a flood. Tension mixed with unease. Was he calling to apologize, or to continue blaming me? 2 years of silence, not a single call or message. And now this sudden contact. I took a deep breath, tried to stay calm, and answered. The call was cold and brief without a trace of warmth. There were no questions about my life, about Sophie or Caleb, the people he had once known through stories I told long ago. Edward got straight to the point with his familiar tone of someone making a decision, as if he were in a business meeting rather than talking to his son. Matthew, I'm calling about family matters. If you really want to make amends and reconcile, then provide capital for Lucas. About $150,000 so he can start a new business project. His words came out dryly without any further explanation, as if it were the most natural thing. I was stunned by the request, both surprised and overwhelmed with mixed emotions. $150,000? Again for Lucas? My heart pounded, anxious as if I were standing at a dangerous crossroads. I didn't expect you to call about this. What kind of project? I asked, trying to prolong the conversation, but he cut me off. No need to ask too much. Think about it, then call me back. Then he hung up, leaving me sitting there, phone still pressed to my ear, my mind spinning. It was too sudden. After 2 years of silence, calling just to ask for money? But mixed in was a spark of hope. Was this a sign of reconciliation? I didn't give an answer right away, only promising to think about it and respond later. My hand gripped the phone tightly, sweat beading, the feeling of anxiety rising. After the call, I couldn't hide a secret excitement. I sat in the office, looking out the window, imagining a family reunion. My parents hugging Caleb, Lucas patting my shoulder and joking around. This could be the door to getting back together, I thought, my heart beating faster. The years of disconnection, the painful isolation, now there was a chance to mend it. I hurried home earlier than usual, my mind chaotic but full of hope. Stepping through the door, the smell of food wafted from the kitchen. Sophie was holding Caleb and singing a lullaby. "Why are you home so early today?" She smiled, but I pulled her to sit on the sofa and told her everything. Today, Dad called me after 2 years. He said if I provide $150,000 for Lucas, this could be a chance to heal the family relationship. I spoke quickly, expecting an empathetic or joyful reaction like the emotions surging inside me. What do you think about this? Is it an opportunity? Contrary to my excitement, Sophie's face fell. A very real look of concern flashed in her eyes, not rushed but enough for me to notice she was wary. Sophie was silent for a moment, her hand gently squeezing mine as if weighing every thought before softly saying, "I'm not sure. Everything feels a bit too sudden. They didn't ask about our lives, didn't mention the baby, and went straight to money. Something feels off to me." She paused, took a light breath, then continued, her voice clearer but still maintaining her familiar calm. "I think there are too many red flags. The way your dad talked, it's like once the money is settled, everything will be fine. But we've been through enough already, honey. We have a stable life now, and any decision needs to be considered very carefully." Sophie looked at me, her eyes not accusing, only filled with worry for our small family. "I'm just afraid, if it turns out like last time, you'll be the one who suffers the most." I was stunned by her reaction, like being doused with cold water. The hope that had been blazing inside me was partly extinguished. I didn't argue. I knew that up to now, as husband and wife, we had always chosen to share and support each other in every important decision. "You're right. I know we can't rush, even though deep down I still hope this is a chance for things not to end in silence," I whispered. But inside I was being pulled in opposite directions. Despite clearly recognizing the long-standing favoritism toward my brother, Lucas always being favored, always the center, I still fell into a state of hesitation. On one side was the desire to belong to my blood family again, to hug my parents, to see Caleb have his paternal grandparents. On the other was reason gradually warning, "This is a trap. Don't do something stupid." My heart pounded, anxious, as if standing on the edge of an abyss. I lay awake that night, Sophie holding me in comfort, but my mind swirled with questions. Is it worth the risk? Or is this just calculation? In the days that followed, my parents took turns contacting me, as if they had planned a coordinated effort to pressure me. It started with my father's first call. Then my mother called next, followed by my father again. They alternated relentlessly, giving me no moment to breathe. The phone rang incessantly, messages poured in. "Have you decided to help your brother yet? Or don't let the family fall apart because of your selfishness." Not a single word asking about Caleb, no concern for how Sophie was doing. Everything revolved solely around the decision to provide capital for Lucas. I felt surrounded, my space for calm reflection gradually shrinking. Every time the phone rang, my heart skipped a beat. I anxiously answered, hoping for something different besides the pressure. But no, it was always the same refrain. "Lucas needs the money urgently. As brothers in the same family, you have to help each other, right?" I responded cautiously, trying to buy time. "I need to think it over carefully, Mom and Dad. I have to check our financial situation and discuss it with Sophie." My voice stayed calm, but inside I increasingly felt cornered. That familiar feeling rose again. Only when it involved my younger brother did they actively reach out to me. Like before, I only existed when I had value, when I could sacrifice for Lucas. The anxiety grew. I wondered, would they stop if I refused? Or would they cut me off again like 2 years ago? One day, while working with the bank to review my entire personal financial records for long-term planning for my small family, everything changed. It was a rainy afternoon in Austin. I was sitting at the local bank branch meeting with a financial advisor to assess savings and investments for Caleb's future. Education, a home. "Mr. Brooks, let's go over your account history," the advisor said, scrolling through the screen. I nodded, expecting nothing unusual. But then among the familiar figures, a strange note caught my eye. Matthew Brooks Education Fund, closed in 2010. My heart pounded hard. anxious as if uncovering a long-buried secret. "What is this?" I asked, my voice slightly trembling. The advisor explained, "This is a trace of an old fund, established in 1995 under your name. It appears to have been closed and fully withdrawn." Initial curiosity quickly turned to shock. An education fund? Left by my grandparents for me when I was young? Throughout my childhood and adulthood, I had never known of its existence. I remembered my grandparents, simple farmers in Texas who passed away when I was little. They had left a will, but my parents only mentioned vaguely. They left some money for the kids. Why had no one ever mentioned this fund? I requested details, my heart racing as if opening Pandora's box. As we traced the timelines and management information, the truth emerged. My parents had been the legal financial guardians of the fund, and they had actively closed it years earlier. The financial records showed that the entire amount, around $50,000 plus interest, had been legally withdrawn in full with no trace of it being used for my education or future. I sat frozen, my hands gripping the document so tightly that my fingers went numb. Blood rushed to my head. My heart raced. "When exactly was the money withdrawn?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The advisor pointed to the statements. "Sir, most of the money was withdrawn in 2005, 2008, and 2012. I leaned in, cross-referencing the dates. 2005, Lucas started college, needing tuition and living expenses. 2008, he bought his first car. 2012, those initial investments the family had vaguely mentioned. It all aligned coldly and clearly. The money hadn't disappeared. It had simply been redirected to support Lucas through every critical stage, from schooling to major financial decisions later on. I sat there stunned, waiting for the wave of dizziness to hit. In my mind, only one unspoken question remained. How could they do this? That was money meant for me, for my future, yet they had taken it and given it to my brother without ever asking me. In that very moment, everything suddenly became clear. The recent request for capital, just like the previous time they pressured me to cover Lucas's debt, had never been about wanting to reconcile. It was merely a continuation of a pattern that had existed for years. Lucas was always the priority, while I was only called upon when needed to fill the gap. The last shred of trust I had held for my blood family collapsed completely, like a building crumbling in an instant. An indescribable feeling of emptiness and bitterness surged, choking my throat. I left the bank and drove home in the rain, tears streaming down my face and mixing with the rain on the windshield. The initial anxiety had turned to pain. Had I been deceived all these years? When I got home, I told Sophie everything, from the unexpected discovery to the conclusions that made it impossible for me to keep reassuring myself as before. We sat in the kitchen while Caleb slept soundly in his room. "Honey, I found an old education fund of mine, but my parents withdrew it all for Lucas." My voice broke. My hands shook as I handed her the papers. Sophie listened, her eyes widening in shock. Then she hugged me tightly. "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. How could they treat you like that?" She comforted me, stroking my back, but also spoke frankly. "You can't keep enduring and staying silent forever. This relationship only exists when you still have value to exploit. You deserve better than that." Those words struck the deepest part of my wound, like a knife cutting into an old injury. The anger I had suppressed for so long suddenly erupted fiercely. Why? Why do they always choose Lucas? I've sacrificed enough, I shouted, slamming the table, tears pouring out. For the first time, I understood that if I continued to stay silent and endure as before, I wouldn't just lose myself. I would also drag my small family into the same cycle of hurt I had experienced. Would Caleb grow up seeing his father being taken advantage of? Would Sophie have to watch me suffer? No, I wouldn't allow it. That night, I lay awake for a very long time. In the darkness, my mind kept spinning around unanswered questions. I imagined every possible scenario when confronting my parents. Would they deny it, get angry, or continue accusing me of ingratitude as before? Each scenario made my heart beat faster, not exactly out of fear, but because I knew I was approaching an inevitable moment. The anxiety built up, tightening my chest until one thought became clearer than all the rest. I could no longer remain silent. No matter how painful the answer might be, I needed to meet my parents, confront them once and for all, to end the ambiguity that had weighed on me for so many years. The next morning, I left the house early and drove straight to my parents' home in Waco. The familiar I-35 highway felt endlessly long today, as if prolonging the anxiety inside me. The Texas wind whipped through the open window, carrying the dry, dusty smell of the earth, but it couldn't dispel the simmering anger within. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, reminding myself, I have to face this directly. I can't avoid it anymore. No more waiting for signals from them, calls that were only to demand money, messages that pressured me. I carried an iron resolve like a protective wall for my small family. The radio played an old song about a broken family. I quickly turned it off, leaving only the steady hum of the engine in my chaotic heartbeat. What will they say when they know I discovered the education fund? I wondered, sweat beading on my palms. The anxiety intensified as the Waco signs appeared like a countdown to the explosion. When I parked in front of the old house, my heart pounded like a drum. The windows still had the same floral curtains, the front yard grass overgrown. Everything familiar yet now strange. I stepped out of the car, took a deep breath, and knocked firmly. My father opened the door. His eyes flashed with surprise, then quickly shifted to expectation. "Matthew, you finally came." His voice trembled slightly, but his eyes lit up with eagerness, as if he was certain I had brought the answer they wanted. Agreement to provide the $150,000 for Lucas. My mother appeared behind him, her face brightening. "Son, come in. You've made your decision, haven't you?" They hurriedly probed, pulling me into the living room, where everything remained unchanged. The old sofa, the family photos on the wall. But now, looking at them, I saw only pretense. They sat down, eyes gleaming with anticipation, as if I were the savior arriving just in time. I didn't respond to their initial expectations, nor did I explain why I had come. I sat facing them, back straight, hands on my thighs to stay calm, then spoke slowly, word by word. "Mom, Dad, I didn't come here for small talk or to beat around the bush. I came to talk about the education fund that Grandma and Grandpa left for me many years ago." The air in the room suddenly froze. My father frowned while my mother unconsciously clenched her hands together. In that brief moment, confusion flashed across their faces, only to be quickly replaced by their familiar defensive reaction. "The education fund from your grandparents?" My father stood up abruptly, his voice rising unnaturally. "Who told you that nonsense?" I looked him straight in the eye. His evasive gaze and slightly trembling hand told me I had hit the mark. I slowly pulled the documents from my bag and placed them on the table in front of them. I spoke, my voice low but clear. "This fund was established in 1995 in my name. Grandma and Grandpa left it for my education. But the money was almost entirely withdrawn over the years, and all of it was used for Lucas." My father glanced at the papers for a second, then suddenly roared, furious, as if insulted. "You really are ungrateful. Your mother and I raised you, fed you, educated you, took care of you every day. What's wrong with using that money? Who do you think you are to question us?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm not questioning you. I just want to hear the truth, because that was my money, left by my grandparents for my future." My mother burst into tears, her voice breaking with sobs. "Son, back then the family was in such difficulty. We had to scramble for everything. Lucas was still young. He needed help. We couldn't abandon him." I turned to look at her. "And what about me?" I asked, my voice low but clear. "When I needed protection, did anyone ask if I could bear it? Or was it just assumed that I had to understand, had to yield?" My mother was silent for a moment, then shook her head. "You're the eldest son. Yielding and sacrificing for your younger sibling is only natural. Every family is like that. There's no calculating gains and losses at home. I let out a soft laugh, but it carried no joy. Sacrifice without ever being asked, without ever being told the truth, I said slowly, is no longer sacrifice. It's simply being taken. My father slammed his hand on the table, the sound sharp and dry. Why are you digging up all this now? He growled. You're already settled with a job, your own family. Why not think about continuing to help your brother instead of stubbornly stirring up the past and making things more complicated? I looked at him. This time there was no more anxiety. Because I need to know whether in this family I was ever seen as someone who needed protection. Or from beginning to end, was I just the person called upon whenever money was short? My mother cried harder, her voice almost pleading. Don't say that, son. We're family. Don't make things any more tense. I shook my head gently. I'm not making it tense. I'm just saying what no one has been willing to say all these years. The room sank into heavy silence. I realized I was no longer waiting for any answer. I stood up, my voice calm to the point that even I was surprised. I didn't come here to demand money. I just wanted for once to hear the truth. But now I understand. My father slumped back into his chair, his eyes vacant. My mother continued crying but said nothing more. And as I turned and walked out of that house, I knew clearly that I had just closed something that had been cracked for a long time, not with anger but with final clarity. I left the house in deep disappointment, carrying a greater emptiness than from previous rejections. Stepping outside, the Texas wind blew bitterly cold, but it was nothing compared to the chill in my heart. The car sped along the highway, but my mind was in turmoil. Images of my angry father and crying mother replaying, causing tears to stream down my face. For the first time in my life, I accepted the truth that I would be the one to actively cut everything off. Not out of hatred. I didn't hate them. I was only sad. But to end a cycle of hurt that had lasted too long. No more calls demanding money, no more illusory hopes of reconciliation. I would protect Sophie and Caleb from that pain. Back in Austin, I hugged my wife and son, telling them everything. I faced it. It's over now. Sophie held me tightly. You were so brave. But that night I still lay awake, anxiously thinking about the future. Would they call again? Or was this truly the end? I promised myself I would not let Sophie and Caleb step into that pain. When I returned to Austin, I held my wife and son close, recounting everything briefly, as if simply saying it aloud was enough. I've said everything that needed to be said, I whispered to Sophie. No matter what, I won't let it drag on any longer. Sophie wrapped her arms around me, holding tight as if to keep me anchored in the present. You did what you needed to do, she said, her voice low and steady. Not everyone has the courage to confront and stop at the right moment. Even so, that night I tossed and turned for a long time. In the darkness, thoughts kept coming one after another without end. Would they call again? Or had everything truly closed this time? I was no longer afraid of the answer. I simply waited quietly, like someone who had reached the very end and was ready to accept whatever came next. Sophie lay beside me, breathing steadily, but I knew she was awake too. Her hand gently squeezed mine, a silent comfort. I stared at the ceiling, replaying the confrontation in Waco. My father angrily slamming the table, my mother crying and making excuses, and me leaving with a heavy heart. The initial anxiety had now turned into a deep weariness, as if I had run an emotional marathon and just wanted to stop. But deep down, I knew the decision to cut ties was right. No more cycle of hurt. After that confrontation, I actively severed all contact. No more calls, no texts, no following or inquiring about my parents' lives. I deleted their phone numbers from my contacts and blocked any possible communication on social media. It wasn't an act of anger, but a clear-headed choice to protect myself. I focused entirely on my work and my small family. I woke up early in the mornings, jogging around the Austin neighborhood, breathing in the fresh air laced with the scent of fresh grass and coffee from roadside cafes. At the office, I dove into cybersecurity projects, building firewalls, detecting vulnerabilities, training the team. My career advanced. I got a raise and bought more toys for Caleb. At home, I played with my son, teaching him to build with Lego, reading children's books, or simply cuddling him on the rug while watching cartoons. Sophie and I made time for each other. Date nights at home, cooking pasta and drinking wine, talking about the future. "Are you feeling better?" Sophie asked, her eyes full of concern. I smiled. "I'm okay now, really. At least whenever I'm with you. As long as we have each other, I think we can get through anything." But sometimes in those peaceful moments, a vague anxiety still crept in. Would the past come back? I thought everything had closed, like a book slammed shut. No more calls demanding money, no more unreasonable requests. My life gradually settled into a routine. Weekends taking Caleb to the park, watching him run and laugh, or cleaning the house with Sophie. But information about them still reached me in unexpected ways, even though I wasn't seeking it. It was like a twist of fate, making my heart skip a beat each time. Everything became clearer during an unplanned family gathering. It was my cousin Sarah's wedding in Dallas, an outdoor party with low-hanging lanterns and lively live music. Sophie and I brought Caleb, thinking it was just a rare, joyful occasion. But amid the lively chatter, Aunt Martha pulled me aside, her voice lowered as if afraid someone might overhear. "Matthew, have you heard anything about your parents?" she asked, her eyes clearly showing pity. Without waiting for my answer, she continued, her voice dropping. "They put all their faith in Lucas, pouring almost all their assets into unclear business deals and projects. Now they're suffering continuous losses with no way out." I stood frozen. The music and laughter behind me seemed to fade. The scattered pieces of information from before suddenly connected in a way I hadn't wanted. Clear and cold, impossible to deny. She spoke haltingly, glancing around as if afraid of being heard. "Lucas convinced them to invest in real estate, then some stocks. But it was all losses. They sold land, withdrew savings. Now—" My heart pounded as I anxiously waited for details, though I tried to keep a calm face. "Do you know more?" I asked quietly, even though I didn't want to. She shook her head. "I only know they're in dire straits. Lucas made big promises, but now he's disappeared." I nodded and walked away, but that information took root in my mind, making me anxious throughout the party. Sophie noticed. "Are you okay? You suddenly went quiet," I told her, and she squeezed my hand. "You heard it, now let it go. Don't let those things pull you out of the present. Not everything that happens is your responsibility." Lucas was gradually revealed to have hidden his true financial situation. He had dragged my parents into an uncontrolled investment spiral, continually making promises of high returns, while in reality they were high-risk projects, some even shady. Not long after, my cousin Ben told me over the phone when I couldn't resist calling for more details. "I heard Lucas tell your parents about a real estate project in Houston guaranteeing double the profit." He paused for a second, then continued, his voice heavy. "But it turned out to be a scam. The contractor vanished, the project collapsed. Your parents lost everything. All the savings they had accumulated over a lifetime quickly vanished. Retirement funds, savings, even borrowed money." My chest tightened as I listened, anxiously imagining my parents, once so stern, now desperate. The family home, once a spiritual anchor, was foreclosed by the bank. I could picture it clearly. The old house in Waco, with the backyard I used to mow, now bearing a "for sale, urgent" sign. The savings accounts were successively drained, leaving no financial safety net. "They've had to sell furniture to pay debts, dear," Aunt Martha texted later. I read it, my hands trembling, but didn't reply, anxiously wondering how they were living now. My parents were forced to leave their old home, living furtively in a cramped, unfamiliar rental apartment, according to Ben. They moved to a cheap suburb in Temple, an hour's drive from Waco. A tiny apartment, no yard, just 2 moldy bedrooms. I imagined them huddled in the tight space, completely opposite to their previous stable life with a spacious house and familiar neighbors. Along with the financial collapse came a prolonged emotional crisis. "Your father has become very quiet. Your mother often cries alone," Aunt Martha said. The two elderly people struggled, not knowing where to turn for the remaining years of their lives. "They called me asking to borrow money, but I don't have any either." That information reached me in scattered fragments, weighing heavily on my heart, anxiously waiting to see if there would be more bad news. I absorbed all this information in silence. There was no sense of vindication that outsiders might assume, nor any bitter satisfaction creeping into my heart. All that remained was a heavy, quiet, and distant feeling, as if I were watching a sad movie about the lives of people who no longer belonged to me. I understood what was happening. I saw the causes and consequences, but the emotions no longer surged intensely. Everything appeared clear, cold, and at a distance far enough for me to realize that I had long since stepped out of that vortex. I knew clearly that I no longer had the ability to help. Their finances were for Caleb, for our stable future. And more importantly, I no longer had the obligation to intervene in choices they had made themselves. They chose to trust Lucas, chose to favor him. Now they bore the consequences. Deep down, I realized that everything unfolding was not a sudden disaster, but the direct result of years of misguided indulgence and biased decisions. From a young age, Lucas was spoiled, never held accountable. Now he had pulled them into the abyss. This is the path they chose themselves, I thought, my heart pounding as I faced that harsh truth. 1 month after the confrontation with my parents, I forced myself to return to the familiar rhythm of life in Austin. Mornings began early as usual. I brewed a strong black coffee, kissed Sophie and Caleb goodbye before leaving the house. My cybersecurity job continued to be a solid anchor, where complex lines of code and vulnerabilities demanding attention forced me to focus completely, temporarily pushing aside the lingering heaviness. The days passed relatively smoothly, as if everything had finally settled. But when night fell and the house sank into quiet, old memories silently returned. They didn't surge violently, just enough to keep me tossing and turning, anxiously wondering if more upheavals lay ahead, or if this was truly the end of everything that had dragged on for so many years. Just as the financial consequences for my parents hadn't yet fully subsided, one ordinary morning I happened to catch a local news report on TV. It was a typical day. I was sitting at the breakfast table, Caleb grinning widely as he smeared cream on his face, Sophie giggling while wiping it off for him. The TV was on in the background, a Texas news channel covering weather and traffic, when it suddenly switched to a major arrest story. Federal authorities have just dismantled a professional fraud ring, arresting dozens of suspects involved in deceptive financial schemes, the anchor's voice announced, accompanied by footage of police raiding offices and handcuffing suspects. I wasn't paying much attention, sipping my coffee, when my heart suddenly stopped. A familiar face appeared on the screen. Lucas, my younger brother, pale and ashen, being led to a police car. His name was clearly stated. Lucas Brooks, one of the key members directly involved in the operation, is accused of defrauding millions of dollars from investors. I froze in shock. The coffee cup slipped from my hand and crashed onto the table, spilling everywhere. Sophie startled. "What's wrong, honey?" I couldn't answer, my eyes glued to the screen, anxiously waiting for more details. How could this be? Lucas. He had gone too far from shady projects to professional fraud. The initial shock quickly turned into a cold emptiness, as if all the tangled pieces from before had finally revealed themselves in the cruelest way possible. I turned off the TV and slumped into the chair, my mind reeling. My brother, Lucas, was arrested for fraud, I whispered to Sophie, my heart pounding as if it might burst. Anxiety surged. What now? What would happen to the family? In the days that followed, the news spread like wildfire. Local media reported details. The fraud ring had operated for years, promising high returns from fake real estate and stock investments, scamming hundreds of victims. Lucas was named as a right-hand man, responsible for hiding money flows and recruiting investors, including my own parents. I didn't seek it out, but the news kept coming. Emails from relatives, calls from old friends in Waco. "Have you heard the big news lately? Lucas got arrested?" Aunt Martha called, her voice trembling. I listened calmly. I just found out too. But inside, anxiety built like waiting for a storm. Would I get dragged in? Or was this the end of everything? Weeks later, the public trial began, drawing local media attention. The courthouse in Waco, the old building with polished wooden benches worn by years, the smell of old paper mixed with the sweat of people, gave me a heavy feeling the moment I stepped inside. The night before the trial, I had told Sophie about the subpoena I received as a related party, not as a defendant, but as an indirect victim, since the money my parents invested went through Lucas. That evening, Sophie looked at me for a long time before softly asking, "Are you sure you need to go?" I was silent for a moment, then nodded. "I think I should, at least to see for myself how far it's gone." The next morning, I drove alone from Austin to Waco. On the way, my heart beat faster than usual. Not exactly from fear, but from the sense that I was about to step into a conclusion I had delayed for too long. In the courtroom, I saw my parents sitting in the back rows. We didn't greet each other. My father kept his head down throughout, while my mother occasionally wiped away tears, as if any words now would be superfluous. The trial exposed the entire long-running fraudulent operation: fake emails, forged contracts, and ways of hiding money through offshore accounts. The prosecutor presented details with charts and evidence. Lucas sat in the defendant's seat, his face pale green, avoiding everyone's eyes. I sat silently, quietly witnessing the truth laid bare before the law. Each testimony cut like a knife. Defendant Lucas Brooks persuaded victims, including his own family, to invest in non-existent projects. Anxiety peaked when my parents' names were mentioned. They had invested all their savings and lost everything. Every detail in the case file was brought to light. The prosecutor called witnesses. One victim described how Lucas promised 200% returns. A financial expert analyzed the money-hiding methods. Lucas's specific role in the network: he was the broker, recruiting and defrauding, taking high commissions. The defendant knew the risks but continued anyway, the judge said sternly. I glanced at Lucas. He kept his head down, not daring to look at me or our parents. My heart raced. Part of me still anxiously waited for some defense that might change things. But his lawyer spoke awkwardly, almost reluctantly. My client made wrong decisions and believes he was drawn into agreements beyond his control. My parents sat right there. My father, Edward, kept his head bowed, silent to the point of nearly disappearing from the room. The man who once gave orders and imposed decisions now shrank like a faint shadow. My mother, Joanne, cried nonstop, her shoulders shaking, forced to face the truth about the son she had blindly protected despite all warnings over the years. I realized that for the first time my parents had to look straight at the truth of their own choices, with no one left to blame or cover for them. No more sacrifices for family, no more favoritism, just harsh consequences. Anxiety rose as the trial dragged on, reporters taking notes, camera flashes going off. Finally, the court sentenced Lucas to 8 years in prison for participating in the financial fraud ring. The defendant caused serious damage and showed no remorse, the judge declared, hammering the gavel and ending any illusions of an easy restart that the family had once harbored. The courtroom fell silent, then murmurs arose. Lucas stood up, his face ashen, escorted away. He glanced at me one last time, eyes glistening with tears, but I didn't respond. That image etched an irreversible boundary between past and present. My brother, once spoiled, now a prisoner. In my heart there was no clear anger or pity, just a heavy feeling of acceptance, as if everything had reached its inevitable end. I stood up and left the courtroom in silence. I understood that some truths once exposed leave no path back to how things were, for anyone in that family. As I stepped out of the courthouse, the glaring Texas sun beat down, starkly contrasting the chill in my heart. The initial anxiety had somehow dissipated, giving way to a strange sense of peace. Everything at last had come to a close. I drove back to Austin. The familiar I-35 highway now felt longer, with chaotic thoughts swirling in my head. The image of Lucas being escorted away replayed over and over, his eyes glistening with tears but no longer pleading as before. My father with his head bowed in silence, my mother sobbing, all of it like a tragic movie coming to an end. When I got home, Sophie was waiting at the door. Caleb rushed out and hugged my legs. My son grinned widely, and that moment chased away some of the heaviness. I told Sophie everything, my voice calm but trembling. Lucas got 8 years in prison. And my parents, they're devastated. She hugged me tightly. You've endured more than enough. Now you can think about yourself and your small family without having to carry those burdens anymore. But that night I still lay awake, anxiously wondering what might happen next. How would my parents fare? Or was this truly the final period? Sometime after the trial, our life gradually returned to its familiar rhythm. In the first weeks, I tried to avoid thinking about Waco, focusing on work, a major cybersecurity project that required overtime but helped me forget. Caleb was growing bigger now, babbling stories from preschool. Sophie was busy with her part-time job. But deep down, a void remained, not anger, but a sad acceptance. I no longer followed news about Lucas or my parents, but sometimes, in quiet moments, anxiety crept in. Were they okay? Or would fate bring more upheavals? One evening, our family was having dinner, our favorite Texas barbecue, Caleb giggling as Sophie fed him. The atmosphere was peaceful and warm, like what I had grown accustomed to after all the storms. Suddenly, the doorbell rang unexpectedly, shattering the routine. My heart skipped a beat, anxious with a bad premonition. I stood up, wiped my mouth, trying to stay calm. I'll go see who it is. As I walked to the door, my hand trembled slightly on the knob, and then I froze. My parents stood before me, looking gaunt, exhausted, and visibly aged. My father, Edward, once upright and stern, now hunched over, hair completely white, face hollow. My mother, Joanne, thin and frail, eyes red and swollen, no longer carrying the imposing or rigid demeanor of before. They stood there under the porch light like two ghosts from the past. Despite the shock, I remained polite and invited them in. Please come inside, Mom and Dad. My voice was calm. I chose to respond composedly rather than react emotionally in the moment. I didn't want Caleb to witness chaos or Sophie to worry more. They stepped in slowly, eyes scanning our small, cozy home. Sophie stood up and greeted them politely. Caleb looked on curiously, but I told him, "You and Mommy keep eating." We sat in the living room. The atmosphere was stifling, anxious, like waiting for a bomb to explode. My father cleared his throat, his voice trembling. "Matthew, we came to talk." My mother burst into tears immediately, hand over her mouth. "Son, we were wrong. Completely wrong." My parents choked up, almost collapsing in late remorse. My father bowed his head for a long time before speaking, his voice hoarse and heavy. "I was wrong, Matthew. I favored Lucas, took your sacrifices for granted. I pressured you to bear everything, even took the money from your fund without a word. I know. Those things hurt you deeply." He paused, breathing slowly, as if trying to say what had been suppressed for too long. "I don't expect you to forget what happened. I only hope you understand that this regret is genuine." My mother cried, tears silently falling. She wiped her face, voice shaking. "I was blind. I always defended your brother, always thought you could endure anything. I ignored your feelings for years. Matthew, I'm sorry. We were wrong." She looked up at me, eyes weary. "We didn't come here to ask for money or demand anything. We just hope, if you allow it, to see Sophie, to meet our grandson, that's all." I listened in silence. Then I turned to Sophie. She said nothing, just nodded slightly, her eyes both concerned and respectful of my decision. Caleb continued playing innocently at the table, completely unaware of the adult's fractures. I turned back to my parents. I spoke slowly. "I've heard you and I accept the apology. I forgive you, but I need to make one thing clear. From now on, there will be no more pressure, no more favoritism. And my small family will never have to sacrifice again. I need clear boundaries to protect Sophie and Caleb. My father nodded, voice choked. I understand. I won't let it happen again. My mother wiped her tears and softly said, "Thank you, son. Thank you for giving us a chance." They stood up quietly. Before leaving, my mother bent down to gently hug Caleb while my father just watched from afar, as if afraid to cross the line. When the door closed, I stood still for a long time, the feeling of anxiety still lingering. Not from fear, but from knowing that from here on, everything could only continue if the boundaries just set were truly respected. A few days later, I received a call from my parents. My father's voice on the other end was lower, more weary than ever. "Matthew, we want to visit Lucas. I know this isn't easy for you, but if possible, would you come with us?" I was silent for a few seconds. The thought of facing Lucas made my chest tighten, not from anger, but because I knew that moment would close many things. In the end, I simply replied that I would go. We met at the prison near Waco, a gray, cold building where the clang of iron doors echoed sharply. My parents stood beside me, looking older in just a short time. My father said little, only sighing repeatedly. My mother clutched her hands tightly, trying to stay composed. In the visitation room, Lucas appeared behind the glass. The oversized prison uniform made him look much smaller. His face was gaunt, eyes red, avoiding our gaze. My father spoke first, his voice no longer harsh, only trembling. "Lucas, we were wrong to shield you for so long. I'm not saying this to blame you anymore, but to make one thing clear, you have to take responsibility for what you've done. No one can carry it for you anymore." My mother burst into tears, voice breaking. "I still love you, Lucas, but I can't continue protecting you in the wrong way as before. If you want to start over, you have to begin by facing what you've caused." Lucas looked up, tears streaming down. His voice cracked through the glass. "I was really wrong. I deceived everyone, caused you to lose everything, made my brother suffer. I'm sorry." He turned to me, eyes full of remorse. "I'm sorry, bro. I don't dare hope for your forgiveness. I just want you to know I'm truly regretful." I looked at Lucas for a long time. No anger, no pity as before. Just a cold clarity. "I accept your apology," I said slowly, "but I can't pretend none of it happened. You have to serve your sentence, pay the price for your choices. That's the only way for everything to stop." Lucas nodded, tears falling uncontrollably. That moment wasn't reconciliation nor a new beginning. It was the period at the end of a long cycle of shielding, favoritism, and distortion, where everyone finally had to stand in their rightful place without evasion or further blame. The three of us left the visitation room in silence, neither relieved nor dramatized, only the acceptance that some relationships can't return to how they were, but can only exist within new boundaries. As the car drove back to Austin, I looked out the window, anxiously thinking about the future. What would those boundaries be like? My father drove, hands gripping the steering wheel tightly, eyes fixed on the road, not saying a word. My mother sat in the back, wiping tears with an old handkerchief, occasionally sighing deeply. I sat beside him, my mind chaotic with overlapping thoughts. Lucas behind the glass, his voice trembling as he apologized. My parents finally admitting their mistakes, but too late. The I-35 highway stretched out under the Texas afternoon sun. Cotton fields white on both sides, but my heart was unrestful. Anxiety rose. Would these boundaries hold? Or would the past flood back, pulling me into the old cycle? After all the upheavals, I returned to the life I had painstakingly built. Work in Austin was more stable than ever. I was promoted to cybersecurity team leader with major projects demanding intense focus. Every morning I woke at 6 a.m., jogged around the neighborhood, breathing in the fresh air mixed with the scent of freshly cut grass and coffee from roadside cafes. At the office, I sat in front of the screen hunting vulnerabilities and protecting systems from invisible threats. This job had become part of who I am, helping me control my life. My career progressed steadily, quarterly bonuses, respect from colleagues, and new training courses that made me feel I was growing. But most importantly, my home, the small apartment in Austin, was now filled with laughter. A place where I found a sense of security I had never known before. No more sleepless nights worrying about calls from Waco, no more pressure to sacrifice. Just peace, simple but solid. Life with Sophie and Caleb brought me a quiet but certain kind of happiness. Not loud like big parties, no need to prove anything to anyone. Just enough for each day to feel meaningful. Sophie remained my steadfast support. She worked part-time at a design company, came home early to care for Caleb, and always made time for us. On weekend mornings, we slept in, made fruit smoothies, and sat on the balcony watching Caleb play with his toys. "What are you thinking about?" Sophie asked, holding her teacup, eyes sparkling. I smiled, thinking how truly lucky I am to have you by my side. That happiness came from small things. Caleb calling Daddy when I got home, Sophie's goodnight kiss, or short picnics in the nearby park. But sometimes anxiety still crept in. Would this peace be disrupted? I learned to savor the simple things. Family dinners became a sacred ritual. I helped Sophie cook, chopping vegetables, grilling meat, while Caleb sat in his high chair babbling about preschool. Today I drew an elephant. My son grinned, face smeared with ketchup. We ate slowly, talking about our days. Sophie shared about her new project. I told her about an interesting security vulnerability. Evenings playing with my son, building wooden block castles, reading children's books with funny voices, or chasing each other around the house until all three of us collapsed in exhausted laughter. We made small plans for the future, saving for a beach trip, buying a new bike for Caleb, or redecorating the bedroom. Everything was based on trust and mutual respect. Sophie and I always discussed decisions, no pressure, no favoritism. "What do you think about buying a bigger house?" I asked one evening. She thought for a moment. "If we're ready, sure. But I think things are good as they are now. No anxious worry, just calm certainty." My parents visited occasionally, still maintaining a cautious distance, as if afraid getting too close would shatter everything again. The first time after the prison visit, they called, voices hesitant on the line. "Can we come visit you all?" Hearing that, my heart skipped a beat. In that brief moment, the familiar anxiety returned, not from anticipation but from fear that old demands might resurface. But this time they didn't. They arrived on time, spoke measuredly, respected the set boundaries, as if they too were learning to stand in their new place in the family. The way they looked at their grandson had changed, gentler and more sincere, without imposition. My father sat on the floor playing with Caleb, voice warm and low. "Grandpa will teach you how to build a castle." My mother hugged him, whispering, "You look just like your daddy." They didn't mention the past, didn't demand anything, just short visits, a few hours long. I allowed them into our small family's life, not too close to avoid old wounds, but not completely closed off so Caleb could know his grandparents. I supported my parents just enough to help them stabilize their lives. Not to compensate for the past, I didn't owe them that, but as a conscious, voluntary choice from me. They lived in a cramped rental apartment, finances tight after their losses, so I sent a modest amount monthly. Enough for basic bills, nothing more. "I'm sending this to help out," I said over the phone. My father thanked me. No pressure, no demands, just humane assistance. They started doing odd jobs, my father small repairs, my mother sewing for neighbors. Their life gradually stabilized, though simple. I observed from afar, anxiously wondering if they had truly changed. But through the visits I saw, they listened more, respected boundaries more. One time, watching Caleb play happily with his grandparents in the living room, I stood quietly in a corner of the house, clearly feeling the current peace so different from the heavy years before. It was a Sunday afternoon, gentle Texas sunlight filtering through the window. Caleb giggled as Grandpa, my father, pushed a toy car, and Grandma, my mother, told fairy tales. I leaned against the wall, coffee cup in hand, emotions welling up. Old memories flashed by one. Childhood sacrifices, the confrontation in Waco, the trial, the prison visit. But now they no longer felt sharp or painful. They had become clear lessons about boundaries, responsibility, and the value of fairness in family. I realized that family ties only truly matter when they aren't placed on one person's shoulders as a default obligation or unconditional sacrifice. What I had gone through showed me that family love cannot exist if it always comes with favoritism and imposition. When one person constantly yields while another is automatically prioritized, it's no longer connection. It's distortion disguised as family. I also learned that forgiveness doesn't mean pretending nothing happened. True healing only has value when accompanied by respect and clear change. My parents now knew how to keep proper distance, no longer pressuring or interfering in my life as before. Though the past couldn't be erased, I acknowledged their change because it showed they had, to some extent, understood the boundaries I needed to protect myself. Watching Caleb grow up in a stable, healthy environment made me even more aware of my responsibility. My greatest task wasn't fixing what was broken in the past, but ending the cycles of hurt so they wouldn't pass to the next generation. I want my son to grow up with the right to say no when needed, to set boundaries without guilt or fear of being seen as ungrateful. From that journey, I drew a message for myself and for anyone trapped in damaging family relationships. Daring to say no isn't selfish. Setting boundaries isn't ingratitude. And sometimes protecting the life you've worked hard to build is the only way to preserve what's truly worth cherishing.